It is 4 in the morning, and somewhere on the frozen edge of the Roman Empire, a man is awake before the sun. He is not a soldier standing guard. He is not a servant forced from his bed by duty. He is the most powerful man alive, the Emperor of Rome, and he could stay wrapped in silk sheets for as long as he wants. No one would question him. No one would dare. And yet, every single morning, he forces himself up. He picks up a pen. He writes to himself, not for an audience, not for glory, but simply to remind himself of one brutal truth. Today, people will be ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and unsociable. And it is still his job to rise, to do his work, to be a human being. His name was Marcus Aurelius, and what he was practicing in that freezing tent, before anyone else in his empire had opened their eyes, was not power. It was not leadership. It was something far rarer, far harder to hold on to, and far more valuable than any throne. It was discipline, not the fake discipline you see on social media, the six-pack abs, the 5 a.m. workout selfies, the hustle culture posters that burn out in 3 weeks. Real discipline, the kind that doesn't need applause. The kind that shows up when no one is watching, when nothing exciting is happening, when your body and your mind are both screaming at you to quit. If you have ever set a goal and abandoned it by the second week, if you have ever known exactly what you should do and still done the opposite, if you have ever looked in the mirror and felt disappointed in the gap between who you are and who you could be, this video is for you. Because today, we are not going to talk about discipline the way the internet talks about it. We are going to go back 2,000 years to the philosophers who didn't just write about self-mastery. They lived it, tested it in exile, in slavery and poverty, and even in the face of death. We are going to learn how Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca built minds of iron in a world just as chaotic, just as distracting, and just as unforgiving as our own. By the end of this video, you will not just understand discipline. You will have a framework, ancient, tested, and brutally effective, for building it in your own life, starting today. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, the place where ancient philosophy meets modern life, where forgotten wisdom becomes practical power. If this is your first time here, consider subscribing. Because every week we take the ideas that shaped emperors, slaves, and statesmen, and we turn them into tools you can use to build a stronger, calmer, more disciplined version of yourself. Now let's begin. Let's start with an uncomfortable question. Why is discipline so hard? You already know smoking is bad for you, yet millions of people light another cigarette. You already know scrolling on your phone for 3 hours a night is stealing your life, yet you do it anyway. You already know that skipping the gym today will lead to skipping it tomorrow, yet you skip it. This is not a mystery of information. You are not lacking facts. You are lacking something else entirely. The Stoics had an answer for this, and it is going to reframe the entire way you think about self-control. They believed that human beings suffer not because of the world itself, but because of the stories we tell ourselves about the world. Epictetus, who began his life as a slave in the Roman Empire, put it simply, people are disturbed not by events, but by the opinions they hold about those events. Think about that for a moment. It wasn't the tiredness that stopped you from going to the gym. It was the thought, I'm too tired. I deserve a break. I'll go tomorrow. It wasn't the difficulty of the diet that broke you. It was the thought. One slice won't hurt, repeated 100 times until the diet was gone. Discipline doesn't fail at the level of action. It fails at the level of thought, seconds before the action even happens. This is the first major shift you need to make. Discipline is not a battle against your body. It is a battle against your own mind, against the immediate, comfortable, seductive voice that always prefers the easy path. And the Stoics were, without exaggeration, the greatest mental warriors in the history of philosophy. Let's go deeper into the man who arguably mastered this more than anyone else in history, Epictetus. Imagine being born with absolutely nothing. Not poor, nothing, owned by another human being. Your body is not your own. Your time is not your own. Even your name is given to you by someone else. This was the childhood of Epictetus. Some historical accounts say his very leg was crippled, possibly from mistreatment by his master. And yet this man, a slave, powerless, physically broken, went on to become one of the most respected philosophers in the ancient world, teaching Roman senators, generals, and eventually influencing an emperor. How does a man with nothing become a teacher of the powerful? The answer is the foundation of everything we are about to learn. Epictetus realized something most people never grasp in their entire lives. There are things within our control, and there are things outside our control, and almost all human suffering comes from confusing the two. Your master's cruelty, outside your control. Your reputation in the eyes of others, outside your control. The weather, the economy, other people's opinions, the past, the actions of your enemies, all outside your control. But your judgments, your effort, your desires, your responses, your discipline, these, Epictetus said, are entirely, completely, 100% yours. Your master's cruelty, outside your control. Your reputation in the eyes of others, outside your control. The weather, the economy, other people's opinions, the past, the actions of your enemies, all outside your control. But your judgments, your effort, your desires, your responses, your discipline, these, Epictetus said, are entirely, completely, 100% yours. Now here is why this matters for you, sitting here right now, trying to build discipline in your modern life. Most people fail at discipline because they are fighting the wrong battle. They try to control outcomes, how fast they'll get in shape, whether people will notice their success, whether the market will reward their hard work. And when those uncontrollable outcomes don't arrive on schedule, they collapse. They quit. But the Stoic doesn't fight for outcomes. The Stoic fights for effort. Did I show up today? Did I do the rep? Write the page, make the call, resist the temptation, regardless of how I feel, regardless of what happens next. That is the only battlefield that matters, and it is the only one you can actually win every single day, because it never depends on anyone but you. This is the moment to ask yourself something honestly. How much of your frustration with your own lack of discipline comes from focusing on results you can't control instead of actions you can? Write your answer in the comments below. I genuinely want to know. And I read every single one. Let's move to the second pillar of Stoic discipline. And this one comes from a man who lived in luxury most of us could never imagine, and still chose difficulty on purpose. Seneca was one of the wealthiest men in Rome, advisor to an emperor, brilliant writer, owner of estates most kings would envy. And yet in his letters, he describes something strange. He would deliberately eat the cheapest food, wear the roughest clothes, and sleep on a hard bed, not because he had to, but because he chose to. Why would a rich man choose poverty, even temporarily? Because Seneca understood something that modern comfort culture has completely forgotten. Comfort is the silent killer of discipline. If you never practice discomfort voluntarily, your first real hardship will destroy you. He wrote that we should set aside a certain number of days in which we content ourselves with the scantiest food and coarsest dress, so that we can ask ourselves, is this the condition that I feared? This is one of the most powerful and most ignored discipline techniques in human history: voluntary discomfort. Think about your own life. When was the last time you chose to be uncomfortable on purpose? A cold shower when the hot water was right there, standing instead of sitting, walking instead of driving, saying no to the dessert not because you're on a strict diet, but simply to prove to yourself that you can. These aren't punishments, they are training. Every time you choose difficulty when ease was available, you are building a muscle that Seneca called the practice of poverty, a muscle that makes you unshakable when real hardship, the kind you didn't choose, eventually arrives, and it always does. This is why so many people who grow up with everything handed to them struggle the most with discipline later in life, not because they are weak people, but because their muscle for choosing difficulty was never built. Meanwhile, someone who grew up with very little often has this muscle already forged by circumstance. But here's the empowering truth. You don't need to be born into hardship to build this. You can choose it. Starting today, starting with something small, let's talk about how to actually apply this, because philosophy without action is just entertainment, and that is not what this channel is about. The first practice is what the Stoics called the discipline of desire. This governs what you want and don't want. Before you can control your actions, you have to understand what is worth wanting in the first place. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself constantly that external things, money, fame, pleasure, comfort, are indifferent. Not bad, not evil, but not the true measure of a good life either. The moment you tie your happiness to something outside your control, you have handed your discipline over to fate. Ask yourself, are you disciplined about your health but chasing an amount of money that will never feel like enough? Are you disciplined at work but starving your relationships? Real discipline requires clarity first. You cannot be consistent about something you haven't clearly defined as valuable. So before you build any habit, define this: what actually matters to you based on your own judgment, not on what society, social media, or other people's expectations have told you should matter. The second practice is the discipline of action. This is where most people focus all their energy, and it is genuinely important, but it only works once desire is clarified. This is where the Stoics get incredibly practical. Marcus Aurelius wrote a phrase that should be tattooed on the mind of anyone struggling with procrastination. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. This isn't meant to be morbid. It's meant to be clarifying. If you knew with certainty that your time was limited, and it is, you simply don't know the number, would you still spend 3 hours scrolling instead of building the thing you claim to care about? Would you still put off the hard conversation, the difficult workout, the uncomfortable email? Death to the Stoics wasn't a source of fear. It was a source of urgency, a tool to cut through excuses like a blade cuts through fog. Here is a practical technique straight from Stoic practice. Every morning, before you check your phone, before the noise of the world reaches you, ask yourself 3 questions. What is the one thing today that, if I complete it, will make today a success regardless of what else happens? What temptation is most likely to derail me today, and how will I respond when it appears? And finally, if this were my last month alive, would I still be delaying this task? This single morning ritual, borrowed directly from Marcus Aurelius's private journal, which, by the way, he never intended anyone else to read. He was simply talking to himself and can restructure your entire relationship with procrastination. The third practice is the discipline of assent, and this might be the most advanced and the most powerful of the 3. This is about controlling the gap between an impression and your reaction to it. When a craving hits, when you see the notification, smell the food you're trying to avoid. Feel the pull toward the couch instead of the gym. There is a tiny window of time, often less than a second, between the impulse and your response. The untrained mind reacts instantly. The disciplined mind pauses. Epictetus taught his students to say to every strong impression, "You are but an appearance, and not at all the thing you claim to represent." In simple terms, that craving is not truth. It is not a command. It is a suggestion your mind is making, and you are allowed to reject it. The instant you realize that a craving is just a thought, not an order, you take back your power. Try this the next time you feel the pull toward your phone during work, or toward the snack you promised yourself you'd skip. Don't fight it directly. Just pause, name it. This is an impulse, not a fact, and give yourself 10 seconds before acting. In that pause lives your entire capacity for discipline. Now let's talk about something. The Stoics understood that modern productivity culture almost completely ignores. Discipline is not sustained through motivation. It is sustained through identity. Here's the problem with relying on motivation. Motivation is an emotion, and emotions are, by nature, temporary. You feel excited on January 1st and disciplined for 2 weeks, and then the feeling fades, and so does the behavior. This isn't a personal failure. It's simply how emotions work. If you build your discipline on a feeling, you have built your house on sand. The Stoics instead built discipline on identity, a settled, internal understanding of who they were, independent of how they felt on any given day. Marcus Aurelius didn't wake up early because he felt like it. He woke up early because that is what a person who takes their duty seriously does, regardless of feeling. Seneca didn't practice austerity because it was fun. He did it because that is what a person who refuses to be enslaved by comfort does. This is a profound shift, and I want you to sit with it. Stop asking, "Do I feel motivated to work out today?" Start asking, "Am I the kind of person who works out regardless of how I feel?" The first question invites negotiation with your emotions, and emotions will always find an excuse. The second question bypasses emotion entirely and appeals to identity, which is far more stable. Every action you take is a vote for the identity you are building. Skip the workout once. And it's not just one missed session, it's a vote for, "I am someone who quits when it's inconvenient." Show up once, even for 5 minutes, even when you don't feel like it. And it's a vote for, "I am someone who keeps promises to myself." Over months and years, these votes accumulate into a character, and character, to the Stoics, was the entire point of a human life. Let's talk about failure now, because I know exactly what some of you are thinking. This all sounds great, but I've tried discipline before, and I always fall off eventually. I want to address this directly, because the Stoics had a radically different relationship with failure than we do today. Modern culture treats failure as evidence that you are broken, that discipline isn't for you, that you should quit trying and accept who you are. The Stoics treated failure as data, nothing more. Marcus Aurelius did not write in his journal about how disciplined and enlightened he was. He wrote about his frustrations, his anger, his struggle to stay patient with difficult people every single day, because the struggle never fully ends. He was still fighting these battles as the most powerful man in the world, decades into his practice. This should be liberating for you. The goal was never to reach a point where discipline becomes effortless and temptation disappears forever. That point does not exist for anyone, ever. The goal is simply to get back up faster each time you fall. Seneca wrote to a friend that he was not yet a good man, and doubted he ever would be perfectly, but that he was constantly trying to improve, watching his own faults, correcting them day by day. If one of the greatest philosophers in human history considered himself a permanent work in progress, what makes you think you should have already arrived? Let this sink in. Missing one day of your routine is not a failure, it's data. Missing one day and telling yourself, "I've already ruined it," might as well give up completely. That is the failure. That single sentence has destroyed more diets, more businesses, more disciplined habits than any external circumstance ever could. The Stoics call this the all or nothing trap, and it is entirely a construction of your own mind, not a law of the universe. I want you to remember this the next time you slip. A single misstep does not erase months of progress. Only the decision to quit does that. Now let's talk about one of the most misunderstood aspects of Stoic discipline, the role of other people and the chaos they bring into your life. If you've ever tried to build a disciplined life, you know the hardest part often isn't your own willpower, it's everyone else. The friend who mocks your new habits, the family member who tempts you back into old patterns, the co-worker whose negativity drains your energy before you've even started your day. Marcus Aurelius dealt with this at the highest possible level, betrayal from those closest to him, including, according to some accounts, even threats to his rule from people he trusted. And yet every morning, before facing any of it, he prepared his mind in advance. He wrote that he would meet, throughout the day, people who are meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly, and that this was not surprising, because he had seen the nature of good and evil, and understood that these people acted from ignorance of what is truly good, not from malice aimed specifically at him. This is a discipline technique in itself. Premeditation. Before you enter a chaotic environment, Mentally rehearse the difficulty you're likely to face. If you know your coworker is going to be difficult today, decide in advance how you will respond, rather than reacting in the heat of the moment. If you know a family gathering will tempt you away from your goals, decide beforehand exactly what you will and won't do. Discipline crumbles most often not because the moment is unbearable, but because it is unexpected. Remove the surprise and you remove most of its power over you. And here's something crucial. Marcus Aurelius never wasted energy trying to control these people. He accepted that their behavior was outside his control and focused entirely on his own response, which was always within his control. This is the Stoic secret to dealing with toxic environments without losing your discipline. You cannot always change your circumstances, but you can always choose your response to them. And your response is where your entire power lives. If you're finding value in this so far, take a second to hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need to hear these ideas, and it costs you nothing but a click. Now let's continue. Let's talk about time, because this is where Seneca delivered some of the most piercing wisdom in the history of philosophy and wisdom that feels like it was written specifically for our modern age of endless scrolling and distraction, even though it's 2,000 years old. Seneca wrote an entire work called On the Shortness of Life, and his central argument is almost violent in its honesty. Life is not short. We simply waste most of it. He said that people are careful to protect their property, their money, their possessions, but when it comes to time, the one truly irreplaceable resource, they are wildly, recklessly wasteful, giving it away to anyone who asks for it, spending it on things that don't matter, letting it slip through their fingers as if more of it will always be coming. Think about how much of your day is spent on autopilot, the mindless scrolling that eats an hour and gives you nothing back. The television shows you don't even really enjoy, just consume because stopping requires a decision. The conversations about things that don't matter with people who drain rather than build you. Seneca's warning is this: you will reach the end of your life having spent decades of it, and you will not be able to say where it went because you were never paying attention while it was happening. This is why the Stoics were obsessed, genuinely obsessed, with the present moment. Not in a passive, just relax and enjoy life way that gets thrown around casually today, but in an active, disciplined way. Since this exact moment is the only thing you actually possess, waste it, and you have wasted the only currency you truly own. Here is a practical exercise Seneca essentially recommends. At the end of each day, ask yourself honestly, what did I do with today that I will remember in a year? What part of today was simply consumed by distraction, and how much of that time could I reclaim tomorrow? This is uncomfortable. It is meant to be. Comfort is not the goal of Stoic practice. Clarity is. Let's bring this back to discipline directly, because time and discipline are deeply connected. Every act of undisciplined behavior is, at its core, a theft of your future time. The hour you scroll instead of working on your goal is an hour your future self will have to work twice as hard to make up, if they can make it up at all. The Stoics didn't see discipline as a moral obligation imposed from outside. They saw it as basic respect for the only resource you actually have, your limited, ticking, irreplaceable time. Now I want to tell you about a moment in Marcus Aurelius's life that shows exactly what discipline under extreme pressure looks like, because theory is one thing, but seeing it applied in the harshest circumstances is what truly changes how you think. During his reign, the Roman Empire was struck by a devastating plague. Historians believe it may have killed millions across the empire over the years it lasted. At the very same time, Marcus was fighting wars on the northern frontier, defending Rome from invasions, all while his own health was reportedly failing. This was not a man ruling from comfort. This was a man surrounded by death, disease, betrayal, and endless conflict, for years without relief. And in the middle of all of this, in a military tent on a cold frontier, possibly while physically ill himself, he sat down and wrote what would become one of the most important philosophical texts in human history, Meditations, not for publication, not for fame, simply because he needed to remind himself, in the middle of chaos, of the principles that kept him disciplined, sane, and functional. Think about that contrast. He had every possible excuse to abandon discipline, plague, war, betrayal, failing health. Any modern person facing even one of these, let alone all of them at once, would consider it completely justified to fall apart, to abandon their goals, to say, "I'll get back to my routine when things calm down." But Marcus Aurelius understood something that we need to hear today. Things will never fully calm down. There will never be a perfect, stress-free moment to finally start being disciplined. If you wait for ideal conditions, you will wait forever, because life does not offer ideal conditions. It offers this exact, imperfect moment over and over, and your discipline is built entirely in how you respond to it. This is the final and perhaps most important lesson from Stoic philosophy. Discipline is not something you find. It is something you decide, moment by moment, regardless of circumstance. So let's bring everything together into something you can actually use. Starting today, not someday, not when things settle down, today. First, clarify what actually matters to you, based on your own honest judgment, not external pressure. This is the discipline of desire. Without this, you're just being consistent about the wrong things. Second, focus entirely on effort and action, not on outcomes you cannot control. Did you show up today? That is the only question that matters. This is the discipline of action. Third, create a pause between impulse and reaction. When temptation strikes, remember, it is an impression, not a command. You are allowed to reject it. This is the discipline of assent. Fourth, stop relying on motivation and start building identity. Ask not, do I feel like doing this, but am I the kind of person who does this? Every action is a vote for who you are becoming. Fifth, treat failure as data, not identity. A missed day is not a ruined life. It is information. Get back up immediately, without the extra self-punishment. That turns one mistake into a permanent collapse. Sixth, prepare your mind in advance for the chaos other people bring, and accept that you cannot control them, only your response to them. And seventh, respect your time as the irreplaceable resource it actually is. Every hour spent in undisciplined distraction is an hour stolen from the life you claim you want to build. None of this is easy. The Stoics never promised easy. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire, still fought his own anger and impatience every single day until he died. Seneca, brilliant as he was, still had to consciously choose discomfort because comfort's pull never fully disappeared. Epictetus, a former slave who became a legendary teacher, still had to remind his students again and again that freedom is a daily practice, not a permanent achievement. That's actually the most hopeful part of this entire philosophy. You are not failing because discipline is supposed to be easy and you're somehow broken. You are struggling because discipline is genuinely difficult for everyone, always, and the people history remembers as the most disciplined. Humans who ever lived were not people who stopped struggling. They were people who kept showing up anyway. So here is my question for you, and I want you to actually answer it in the comments, not just think about it and scroll away. What is the one area of your life where you already know exactly what you should be doing, and you're simply not doing it? Name it below. Sometimes the simple act of writing it down publicly is the first real step toward the discipline of action we talked about today. If this video gave you even one idea you're going to apply, do 3 things for me. Hit like, because it tells YouTube to show this to someone else who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Wisdom of the Stoics, because we release new videos exploring exactly this kind of practical ancient wisdom every single week, turning philosophy into a toolkit for real life. And share this with one person you know who is struggling with discipline right now. Sometimes the people around us need this message more than we realize. And you might be the reason someone else finally gets back on track. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that you have power over your mind. not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. That single sentence, written by a tired, grieving, overwhelmed emperor on a cold battlefield nearly 2,000 years ago, still holds every answer you need for the discipline you're trying to build today. The question now is simple. Are you going to close this video and go back to the same patterns as yesterday? Or are you going to be the kind of person who takes one idea from today and actually acts on it right now before the motivation fades? The choice, as it always was and as it always will be, is entirely yours. Thank you for watching Wisdom of the Stoics. I'll see you in the next one.